Hi everyone, I just wanted to say welcome to our webinar, Adopting New Sales Technology, How Sales Managers Can Enable Success. We're going to be joined today by Lucy Farrow, who's going to be talking to us about how to improve sales technology use within sales organizations. It's really great that you can all join us and be with us here today. Before I introduce Lucy, I just wanted to remind everyone that we'll be emailing out a recording of the webinar afterwards, so just to keep an eye out for that email. I'd also like to take this opportunity to let you know that Lucy's more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. So the best place to answer or ask questions is to put them in the questions tab, which is on the control panel. So if you want to put them into the question tab, and then I'll be asking Lucy the questions that you have at the end of the presentation. Just to give you a little bit of background on Lucy, she's the Director of Professional Services at White Springs, and she's a specialist in sales training enablement and has had a long history working from a sales technology and business performance perspective. Lucy's got a lot of experience in strategic technology implementation, and she's done that across a number of industries. So today she's here and has kindly offered to join us and discuss what we can do to assess the readiness of our sales team to adopt new sales technology. Is that about right, Lucy?
Sounds good.
That's good.
Thank you. Thanks, Georgina. And welcome, everyone. I'm pleased to be able to speak to you guys today. As someone who loves learning and who loves technology and the sales enablement world, the area of effective sales adoption is very important to me. So today, in today's webinar, I'm going to focus on traditional approaches to sales technologies to date and the results of this, the role of the frontline sales manager, and my views to changing the current dynamic, and what sales managers can do to fast track and increase adoption so that basically the organizational result is actually achieved and so that teams become true advocates of sales technology change. A little bit about my background. I started off teaching many years ago now, just because of a love of learning and a love of observing how people absorb information and translate that. I began working with or in technology around the dot-com era, some potentially 18 years ago, as a multimedia specialist, and basically that meant being able to transition information to online platforms, and most of which were sales enablement related. So that was kind of the beginning of my journey that led me to White Springs, and I think it was a good fit. A little bit about White Springs. Started in 2002. The core focus has been and is sales methodologies, sales technologies, and sales reinforcement. Being in this area myself and working with White Springs has really allowed me and us as an organization to become very attuned to certain gaps in the market. And in light of what we're doing here today, I am actually referring to things like sales technology adoption, sustainability, uptake, user engagement, and all these sorts of things. I've observed behaviours for years from the perspective of end users, from stakeholders trying to purchase new technologies or reinvigorate old ones, lines of business trying to deploy technologies, different size organisations and the like. And one of the main things that I notice or have noticed over a number of years is that one thing stands clear, and that is that adoption is an issue. And it's a global issue, and quite frankly, I really feel like we're not doing this area justice. In fact, there's a big injustice around it, and traditional approaches really do need to change. I've actually skipped through this, so I'm just going to move forward here, guys. So it's quite interesting. I have this sort of quote on the screen at the moment. For 20 years, poor user adoption continues to remain the biggest obstacle to the success of sales software. So if we were having this discussion 10, 15 years ago, the same thing would apply. Yet we're applying the same approaches to this and getting the same end result. And I find it ironic that the sales enablement arena is almost considered a forefather for organizational technologies. And I think that started with one of the first sort of sales-related technologies being the digital Rolodex, which eventually became a CRM, and it went from there. And it's quite amazing how far we've come with sales tools from that time. I mean, there's so much now that supports and drives and monitors sales, but the irony I was referring to really lies in the question around how much of a real outcome are organizations getting from these technologies when we know for a fact that poor user adoption has been the biggest issue since technology inception. So, you know, we're doing something wrong here. And it's a pity. There's great tools out there. And the question that comes to my mind is, you know, how have we let this happen, and what have we been doing wrong? And with that, if we look at traditional approaches to sales technologies, I think it's happening because all the initiatives are designed at a strategic or a high level. So what I mean by that is that most vested interest in and around sales technology and its planning happens at a high level. And that means that there is little focus on the everyday processes and those tactical tasks that sales managers need to perform with their teams. These things aren't adequately planned for upfront, and so they get lost and they get forgotten. And this is why the end result is what it is. If we think about how initiatives work at the moment, there's a group looking at organizational needs, committees are sort of formed, there's a whole series of available products on the market, vendors are reviewed, there's lots of due diligence around, you know, potential products, costs, budget assessments, there's an entire procurement process that goes with all of that, IT is pulled in, integration is reviewed, risk is reviewed, operational deployment is reviewed, sometimes change managers are pulled in. There is a lot of work going into the strategic side, and rightly so. And while there are lines of communication that drill down to a sales manager level, someone with teams, and there is some buy-in and there is some collaboration, most of the time the just, in my opinion, is not enough. And that means sales managers aren't empowered enough or given the right tools and the right support to drive alignment with their teams. So to me, right at the inception, organizations create a gap that's often unaddressed. And I think that's potentially a reason for a lack of adoption in this area. So what then happens as a result is that the results don't change. You know, and I'm not saying that this happens in every organization. You know, some groups manage these things obviously better than others, but generally it is commonplace. So, you know, in these instances, sales managers feel like they're lumped with another task, feel like they have a lack of support around it. The sales initiative is not seen as a priority generally. Teams aren't engaged, aren't aligned, their actions aren't generally monitored if they're made to use a sales tool. Generally, senior members or senior leaders of organizations aren't aligned with what's going on at an end user level. And basically, if we don't address what's going on at this level, we can't expect results to change. So, you know, fundamentally, there is a lack of tactical planning. And the problem is further accentuated by the role of the sales manager today. And if you think about what's happened in terms of that role over the last, say, 15 years, they are expected to do more and more than ever before. You know, as well as running the operations of a team at a daily level, they have to obviously continually look at numbers and look at revenue and potentially their own numbers. Some days they need to be a mentor, a subject matter expert, a coach. On other days they're almost a psychologist to something else that some member of a team is going through. There's often multiple initiatives they need to be running at the same time, and a technology may just be one of many. It's a very, very busy role, busier than it's ever been. And if we couple that fact with the fact that sales today is a much more complex beast than it ever was, it becomes, we understand why they're not seeing sales technology as a priority. But to me, all these things, are an issue, and I think it's the biggest pity in all of this is that there's some great sales tools out there that can really help drive competitive advantage, and they're just not being used. There's no adoption. There's little adoption, or adoption is seen as a failure. And in today's complex sales world, organizations need advantage short. Basically, to sum this sort of section up, I think in most cases sales managers, often don't know enough about all the elements that make for a smooth transition, a smooth implementation around a sales technology. There's elements like planning for behavioral change, working through a change process, and all these sorts of things that they're not empowered to deal with. And I think this, coupled with time constraints and other priorities, is where we see results lacking and a lack of alignment in teams, if that makes sense. So in a nutshell, if we were to ask sales managers today about their views, their stance on what's going on and where they see gap areas, we'd pretty much find that we could categorize in this industry as well. But before I go on to define these are also the basis of the gap areas that are examined in the sales technology readiness assessment. This is the assessment that each participant of the webinar will be receiving, and once the assessment is completed, you will get quite a robust report which really looks at each of these areas and the idea of risk associated with it, pending for what's going on in your organisation. So that will be useful, hopefully. So back to what each of these things mean. Some of them are pretty straightforward. I'll give you a quick summary. So with stakeholder engagement, it's really about the process by which organisations involve people who are affected by or who influence the effective change. I mean, ideally, every stakeholder should be engaged, especially early on in any kind of sales change. But often that's not always the case. Sales managers are often the conduit between the organisation's views and their team's views. They don't always get all the information they need, so this becomes a gap area in that way. The second gap area, so the second common issue sales managers have, is often around communication when it comes to new or existing sales technology, for that matter. Ideally, senior leaders should be vested, and as vested in their communications to sales managers as sales managers should be with their teams. Happens to some degree, but obviously if there was fabulous communication, then we wouldn't be having this webinar. Attention is key here, and it's not always as loose as we would. The third area is basically about alignment and adaptability, and that's about current receptiveness and current responsiveness of sales managers and their teams to adapt to changes required for successful sales and business. Levels of alignment obviously change due to communication, due to stakeholder engagement, but this area of the assessment really does look at that receptiveness and where your organisation is in that area. And the fourth area that we see as a gap area, and that's monitored in the assessment, is performance management. And again, it's the current view of how equipped teams are, and this is more around the change component. So that's all about transitional impact and what's happening in terms of interventions to help drive adoption and all these sorts of things. It's basically about monitoring how well managers and their teams are coping with the change, and being able to measure that. So they're the 4 gap areas. These are the 4 areas that we think are quite important. If I was just to flick over to the next screen, you'll see the sorts of questions that you'll get, or the sorts of statements you'll get in the assessment. And basically the idea is that you rate these on a scale. Each of them is telling of what's going on, and then we will help you sort of look at that as part of the report. I'm just going to move on to the next screen. So I've spoken a little bit about adoption issues. I've spoken a little bit about this is in sales technology, why adoption rates are low, how we can potentially look here. Because when I say things like we need a change of approach, what I'm actually asking is that sales managers become the drivers of change, sales managers to proactively make this change work, irrespective of whether they're being supported by senior leaders or not, irrespective of other situations that may or may not be happening in their workplace. I'm asking them to manage what they have control over, and that is themselves and their teams. And is it an easy ask? No, it's not. It does mean a fair amount of effort with peers, with teams, with additional leaders. It does mean being very proactive. It might mean stepping on some toes, but it can be done. And I really, really believe that it has to be done if we want adoption rates to change. And if we want sales, and if we want to win sales in the 21st century, and if we want to build agile mindsets where teams are advocates of sales technologies and where they will want to use them for competitive advantage, these are the things that we have to change for success. These are the things that have to be done, because things are only going to get more competitive in sales and change is only going to continue. So this to me, so my change of approach is really trying to look at sales managers and allowing them to take control of themselves and their teams by being very, very proactive and owning this change. So a little bit of a light-hearted screen. And I've got there, be prepared, be proactive, and be consistent, because I think those 3 things are key to success here at a high level anyway. And I think the very first thing about creating effective sales technology change and adoption is trying to empower sales managers to own the responsibility and to proactively take steps to drive the change. And asking this of sales managers doesn't generally go down very well, I'll be very honest with you. Managers don't like it when I suggest this because they don't see it as their primary responsibility. They don't want to own it. They have too much additional work. Sometimes they're not supported by seniors in the organisation. But the net of all of this and today is that unless they take ownership and roll up their sleeves and get ready to get dirty, there's going to be no change. Their sales initiatives will fail, adoption rates will be low, and quite likely they will still be seen as part of that failure. So, you know, what do we do from here? What are some of the things that we can do to change this? And I will just move to the next screen. And I have a whole series of ideas, and I've done a quick dump on this one screen of a list of ideas with each bullet there. I could turn into a webinar on its own. So these things are more complex. There is a lot of detail for the purpose of today. You know, I'm just going to give an overview of these things, but if you have additional questions or wants to talk to me, we can do that. The show here is shift that I was speaking about earlier from organizations just focusing on strategic and the shift do. And even if sales managers do and proactive sales technology alignment will be perceived by teams that it will be something that's been executed with teams and not something that has been done to teams, if that makes sense. I don't think I've articulated that well. One of the issues is basically teams often feel that a sales technology implementation is something that is like a mandate. It's been forced upon them. With a lot of proactive application from a sales manager, teams start to perceive that the execution has happened with them, with their buy-in, and that is the purpose here. Because with that collaboration, with close collaboration, adoption happens faster. It happens in a way that is more sustainable. It's the beginning of creating an agile mindset within teams, and that they're all good things. If we fundamentally remember that people just remember 10% of what they hear, 20% of what they read, and 80% of what they do, and we apply that to trying to drive change within teams, then we're in a good space. What we need to do is so much of that experiential learning, and what that is the activity of doing. So create an environment with teams where change is seen in an experiential way, so where they are allowed to do things hands-on, where they are allowed to communicate openly and willingly and being listened to, and talk about real situations for them. The more application in terms of behavioural change, in terms of technology application, the greater the chance of success. Now, if I get a little bit more specific and speak about some of these points, these are some of the practical applications that we can use. Starting off with assess personal. What this area is about sales managers knowing enough about the sales technology to speak lucidly about it to anyone in the organization. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into organizations where there is a new piece of technology being deployed, and I ask some questions about, so how do you see the methodology and the technology alignment working, or what do you think is the greatest benefit of this technology, or so who is the go-to person internally for this sales technology? And I get blank face after blank face after blank face. Or the go-to person is IT, and that's not what I'm asking, obviously. So it's this whole idea of assessing personal knowledge bases really does mean when there is a new technology being deployed, sales managers need to know almost everything they can about it. In order to communicate that through to teams. As the go-to person for teams, they need to know the logistics around it, the technical aspects of how it's going to be deployed within systems and platforms. They need to know the features and benefits of it from a sales perspective and from a technology perspective. How it's going to be monitored on, how it's going to be reported, and all these sorts of things. And this is what I'm referring to in this section alone. And there's a lot that goes with that, but knowing, being confident in your knowledge is really key to then communicating that back to teams. The second area there is about your team's knowledge base. And this is, again, about this for sales managers is about actively considering what teams are going to want to know. And I can tell you up front, all their questions to you will be direct impact questions. Someone in your team is going to be asking, how is this piece of technology going to change my world? They want to know, they will want to know how they will be monitored via this tool, if they will be monitored. They will want to know what operational activities will be changed as a result. They will want to know what training they're going to get, what support they're going to get, all these sorts of things. And if you don't know the answers as a sales manager, if there's ambivalence in your understanding of the sales tool itself or the sales technology itself, then you can't readily build confidence in your teams. So again, a very important piece around applying knowledge. The third area there is about, says create planned communications. Again, I find, and it's an unfortunate situation, but sales managers are, lumped with a sales initiative or a sales technology and asked to run with it. And a lot of the time, it's just like, okay, we have this new tool to use and we've got to use it. Let's look at how to do that. And there's not much real communication around it. And that needs to change as well. At implementation stage, planned and regular communication needs to be overt. Teams need to see a dedicated input from their managers. They need to see that you value them as team players and that you want their collaboration, that you recognize that they add value, and that you also need to recognize positive contributions from them and allow them to have that input. And then after implementation, this should continue where there are planned and regular interventions. And by that, I mean these could happen through the weekly meetings, through your one-on-ones, but there has to be active communication and active activities associated with the sales technology. And this could be from a technology perspective around use. It could be from a sales perspective, pulling out areas and looking at how things are going within an opportunity based on, depending on what the sales technology is, of course. It could be around benchmarking activities associated with the sales tool. It could be around operational use. It could be around a lot of things, but managers need to plan these activities actively and regularly for a minimum of 3 to 6 months is what I really believe. I think 3 months is an absolute minimum. If you have a team of A-listers who are up and running with it, then you can scale back, but ideally it should be, say, 3 to 6 months. I would prefer to actually say 6 months there, so I take the rest back. And the other idea is trying to create accountability. So create champions in your team. Allow teams to know that every week they may need to do something associated with the tool, or not every week for individuals, but one person per week, so that everyone gets a turn over the course of a few months, depending on your team size. But driving accountability and experiential use where they need to talk the talk and walk the walk like you are as their sales manager, all of this stuff really does help drive active use, and it helps drive adoption if done well. And again, I apologize for giving you such a high level and very fast sort of definition of each of these, but if somebody needs more, just please do let me know. One other area I'm just going to touch on quite lightly, looking at behavioural change and trying to implement new technologies under some difficult circumstances isn't always going to go down well with teams, and I think everybody probably recognises that. And the title of this sort of screen is called Engage with Cautionaries. Cautionaries in my world are basically the people who don't see the value of the sales tool, and they don't see the value that the organisation does. They're potentially people who have that sort of low tolerance for change. And quite frankly, I actually think this is of the organisations. But in any case, sales managers need to deal with these people because they are infectious and because they can affect team dynamic. So it's very, very important that sales managers put in a little bit of extra effort to work these guys through their own cycle of change. They're going to require additional support and additional hand-holding, and that does mean more attention. You know, and engaging with cautionaries is about identifying them first and really looking at your team and looking at their responses to initial communications and working out, you know, ways around that. So at this stage, I think that, you know, again, the three key elements for sales managers are really trying to own the change, and in that way create real sales technology success. That means using the tool to its, you know, its best advantage, and then using that tool to drive your competitive advantage, and only get a much better end result. And that's why we're all here, you know, and hopefully your teams will be happy as a result, and your organization will get a better end result, and the net will be joy all round. I'm going to hand back to Georgina. I think there may be some questions.
Hi, Lucy. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I have pages and pages of notes, so that's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, there have been a few questions, so if that's okay, I'll ask you a few of them. One question that someone raised is that do these principles apply to any size organization?
Yes, they do. So I guess earlier in the piece, I sort of spoke about what generally happens in organizations and in terms of the strategic deployment, and some of that doesn't necessarily apply, of course, to smaller size organizations, but the fundamental principles of getting a sales manager buy-in and allowing them to be the driver of change really does apply everywhere, and really is crucial, and potentially even more crucial for the smaller organizations who don't have other people driving anything. So I would definitely say yes, it does apply.
All right. And another question that someone asked was, so you know, you're talking about behaviors and actions that we need to take to embed better behaviors within an organization. Can you give us an idea of how long you think the sort of training programs need to last for, and how long we need to dedicate ourselves to getting that success?
Yeah, I mentioned a sort of a 3 to 6 month period. A lot of it's going to depend on where your team is at in terms of technology and their level of comfort, and how fast you think they are cycling through their change process. And some of this becomes a little bit convoluted because in actual fact, a lot of sales managers are going through their own cycle of change, yet are expected to lead others through cycles of change. So that sometimes convolutes things. But I think if we want to embed behavioral change, then, you know, proactivity needs to be benchmarked at a minimum of 3 months, but should be driven for a good 6 months. And I think at the end of 6 months, you should have champions of change in your team. You should have a team with an agile mindset who expect more change and who are open to it, and who are will use it to make sure they get what they need out of it. So, and that's that. The more you do it, the longer you do it, the greater the success. So I say don't stop doing it. Really, is my personal view. But I benchmark.
And lastly, Lucy, just a final question. Once you've gone through all this process and you've set it up, how do you measure the success of your implementation?
Well, measuring the success, I guess, looking at it, setting some benchmarks up front might be a very good starting point. So, for example, if you are using a particular tool that say is in the opportunity stage of the sales process, and monitoring how fast sales consultants are now progressing through that stage, that might be one benchmark. Obviously doing other things like monitoring adoption rates through the technology potentially, or if it's linked to another platform, for example, a CRM, you might be able to look at usage of the sales technology. Obviously, sales numbers is another way of doing it. But ideally, you'd want to set a mixture of benchmarks. Some should be behavioral, some should be obviously sales related, and some should readily show ROI. They would be, the best benchmarks to measure on. But I actually also say that all of these things, all of these measurements should be collaborated with teams to allow their own buy-in, because they have great ideas as well. And I think it also adds to the whole thing that I've been speaking about, in order to increase that sort of agile mindset.
Okay, well, that sounds fantastic. And at this point, there's no further questions, but I just want to remind everyone that they can get in touch. Your email address on the bottom there if anyone has any further questions. And also remind people that we'll be sending out a recording of this webinar as well, just so that you can follow up with any questions you have, or any parts that you wanted to go over again. So thank you so much for joining us today, Lucy. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Lucy.